A few weeks ago I stumbled upon some statistics from the CIES Football Observatory. They focused on the results of the Champions League group stage since its introduction in 2003. Fact 1. The teams at the top of the groups have progressively earned more points and significantly improved their goal difference. The same analysis for teams at the bottom of the groups confirms an opposite trend. That means that the gap between the top teams and the, let's say, mediocre ones has become wider and wider in recent years. This mirrors a trend in the real world, where 3 Americans own more than the bottom 50% of the American population, an enormous gap. But even worse, the football games during the group stage become more and more predictable. Every year, Champions League games end more and more often the way the bookies predicted. The correlation between prediction and result has grown stronger. And if a match has a clear favorite, the probability that this favorite wins has increased to over 80%. We all love to talk about football. But doesn't it take away the fun when games nearly always end as expected? Why do I bother you with all these statistics? It shows that the gap between the top clubs and the smaller clubs is getting bigger. The competition in football is out of balance. This is also true on the national level. Let's have a look at the champions of the Big 5 leagues over the last 20 years and compare the number of points they earned with the maximum points possible. In the Premier League, for example, a season has 38 games, and in each game a club can grab 3 points for a season total of 114. The last champions, Manchester City, pocketed 98 points. That's 86% of the maximum possible and the second largest haul in Premier League history. The largest was the year before, when Man City became champions with 100 points. That means no other team has ever dominated the Premier League like Manchester City in the last 2 years. King Pep is more dominant than King Alex ever was. Or Italy's Serie A. Not only have Juventus won the title 8 years in a row, they've also earned at least 75% of the points in every season since 2013. Only 2 other teams had managed that feat since the 3-point rule was introduced. Bayern Munich, who won 7 league titles in a row, also took more than 75% of all possible points in each of those 7 years. When Bayern won their first Bundesliga championship in 1969, they bagged only 67.7% of the possible points. Overall, in the Big 5 leagues, the title winners have gone from earning an average of 69.9% of the maximum possible points at the beginning of the millennium to 80.5% in the last 5 years. So, the imbalance between the champions and the rest of the clubs playing in these leagues has gotten bigger and bigger. The times when a small team beats a big team, when David beats Goliath, when something really unpredictable happens, those moments that make us love this sport so much are getting rarer and rarer. You might think now, okay, you're talking about facts and figures and something that happened over the last decades. I still enjoy the games on the pitch. Then let me ask you, do you really? Let's look at my domestic league, for example, the Bundesliga. Not only have Bundesliga clubs barely played a role in international competitions recently, not only have Bayern become champions 7 times in a row, not only did they achieve that without spending a single euro on new players before the last season. No. The game of football itself has become more boring. The smaller clubs are avoiding possessing the ball and waiting for the favorites to make mistakes. No risky passes forward, no power dribblings, no attack mode. Better to let the opponents play and focus on pressing.
I wouldn't come, I wouldn't spend my money to see these teams.
When German club Schalke locked horns with Berlin last year, then Schalke coach Domenico Tedesco did some analysis before the match and found that Berlin always won when they had less ball possession than the opponent. Tedesco's plan: avoid possessing the ball. And sadly, the tactic worked. With less ball possession, Schalke posted a 0-0 home victory and rose to second in the table. A horrible game. And I'm a Schalke fan. The Bundesliga is a very good example of what might happen when one or two clubs dominate the league and the others just react. It's not only about competition and balance. The whole beauty of this formerly beautiful game is at stake. How could it come to this? 50 years ago, the financial situation at the clubs was pretty much the same. Some clubs had bigger sponsors or a bigger stadium, which meant more spectators and more income from ticket sales. But over the years, the gap between rich and poor clubs has become wider and wider. First, because of the domestic TV money, which favors the clubs already at the top. Right now, Bayern Munich makes 65.4 million euros, 40 million more than little Fortuna Düsseldorf. In the Premier League too, Liverpool get nearly 3 times as much TV cash as Watford. International TV money has drastically accelerated that development. And since last year, top European clubs like Real Madrid, Bayern and Manchester United are getting extra money thanks to the Champions League's so-called club coefficients. Those clubs get money from that pool even if they are not successful. Real Madrid got 35.5 million euros just for taking part. AEK Athens got only 1.1 million from the same pool. So, the big clubs make millions just for having big names and being successful in the past. And the number of insane transfers continues to grow.
Ich dachte ehrlich gesagt, irgendwann Financial Fair Play wäre dafür erfunden worden, dass sowas nicht geht.
And we haven't even talked about sponsor money yet. Just one example. Real Madrid pull in 133 million a year from kit supplier Adidas alone. Over 120 million more than, say, Dutch club Ajax. That means that only from selling their kit they can buy one Gareth Bale more than the Dutch champions each and every year. And that's only the kit supplier money. If you put together all the other sponsors, national and international TV money and club coefficients, Real Madrid could buy a whole team of superstars every year. How does that help competition?
No, why? Never.
With this system, it's completely impossible for smaller clubs to close the gap on the top clubs. Even if a club like Ajax have a Champions League season to remember and make it to the semi-finals, it's going to be an exception and will not eliminate the imbalance. So what can we do to save football? What can we do to close the gap?
Honestly, do you think I deserve to make this kind of question?
Let's have a look at the United States. Obviously not a country famous for market regulation or equal distribution of wealth. But they know how to make a show out of their sports, and they know the meaning of competition. The National Football League, for example, has the draft system. Scouts compile lists of the biggest college talents, and every spring the weakest teams from the previous season are the first to sign the biggest talents. This system prevents rich teams from buying all the best players. And at least in terms of competition, the system works. In the last 20 years, 14 different teams have won the Super Bowl. And also in American basketball and baseball, no team can dominate a sport for decades like Bayern Munich do in Germany. But could a draft system work in Europe? I suppose it's not a good idea. Football has become too global to regulate the market in this way. Imagine, with a draft, Mbappé could have ended up in Augsburg, Norwich or Strasbourg. So what else could save European football from a future of boredom? How about playoff games in national championships? You know, with the top 4 clubs playing in semi-finals and then a final. At least the end of the season wouldn't be as boring as it has been in the last years. But many players, coaches and managers wouldn't vote for this. They'd say if you have a fantastic season for 34, 36, 38 match days, but then get knocked out in one single game, it's unfair. What's more, during that part of the season there are enough other finals. In the domestic cups, in the Champions League, it's hard to stage so many decisive games. Well, I think let's try it. It's working in the US, and a true champion must be able to beat every competitor. Or what about salary caps? Every team has a certain maximum amount of money which they can spend on players' salaries. Once again, a successful recipe from US sports. In the National Football League, every team is allowed to spend a maximum of $188.2 million on salaries. Imagine Barcelona having to sell Messi in order to afford Neymar. And yes, change the way TV money gets distributed in all competitions. Every team playing in the Champions League should get the same amount of money. For every win or draw they could get a bonus, and every Bundesliga or Premier League team should also earn the same amount. UEFA and the national associations would be well advised to level the playing field in order to save their sport and their cash flow. Impossible? Formula One racing introduces technical reforms all the time to slow down the fastest cars. And in basketball, the NBA banned the dunk in 1967 because Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was getting too good at it. Newton's first law of motion says an object will remain at rest or in uniform motion in a straight line unless an external force acts upon it. So who can make this change happen? It's us! We are the fans, we are the jersey buyers and are paying for the games. These are my ideas. Do you have more? Please let us know. And maybe we can save football as we know and love it together.